As you can see in the first slide that is a manufacturing technology that converts digital files to physical objects. It's not a new technology, it's been around since 1987, but the reason why it has created all this interest and the reason why we have had interesting questions in IP is because it entered the consumer market a few years ago. You should also bear in mind that 3D printing machines can range, it's very varied, it ranges from 200 to over 1 million. So that's kind of an important point as well as we talk about hobby items and what people might do in their homes and the kind of IP questions that arise from that. It's been used for a variety of different in areas, for example, in aviation, in the medical industry, also in the film industry, and even jewelry, and even pure gold can be printed, or jewelry can be printed by 3D printing. So here's a quote that I have for you. 3D printer without an attached computer and a good design file is as useless as an iPod without music. And I thought that's an interesting quote, bearing in mind we talk of 3D printing, we talk of the hardware, but without it is actually the software that raises, I think, some of the most interesting IP questions. So the UK Intellectual Property Office commissioned this project. In 2013, we were awarded the project, and it was a question of where are we now, and whether there should be anything done right now in terms of the legislation or in terms of regulation. Because there was limited literature on the current situation, a lack of empirical evidence. So our project really looked at two different aspects. One was a quantitative analysis of online platforms, online sharing platforms, and the second one is a qualitative study which looks at the use, adoption, and impact of 3D printing in selected industries. The first part of the report one, or I should in fact go to the next slide and say that, so these are members of the team, myself, Davide Secchi, who unfortunately can't be here today. When we started the project, he was working with myself at Bournemouth University. Since then, he moved to Denmark, to the Southern University of Denmark. So his speech, so he can't be here, but he has sent a recording of his talk, which will be played very shortly for report one. And then Dr. Phil Reeves and Sophie Jones were involved in the report two, and Sophie will speak about that. And then I will finally speak about the conclusions and the recommendations we made to the government, the industry, and so on. So I'm actually going to pass on to Davide, which is the video.
Hello everyone, this is Davide Secchi from the COMAC Research Cluster at the University of Southern Denmark. Before I start my talk, I would like to apologize for not being there at the conference with you as I would have liked, but some previous commitment is holding me here in Denmark for the start of the semester. In this short talk, I would like to discuss briefly about the empirical study that features in the report that, together with Danusha and Phil, we submitted and published with the IPO. The empirical study has been conducted through the data collected by Economist, and it spans over 17 websites for file sharing of 3D printing material. It was extracted in January 2014, and therefore it covers the period that goes from the beginning of this 3D printing file sharing platform. So it's 2008 until January 2014. I'll start with the 3D printing at a glance, which is a figure that we presented in the report right at the beginning of the report, where some of the key information is summarized, and I will briefly go over the description, which is some sort of a state-of-the-art of the 3D printing as it was on these online platforms up to January 2014. So the overview will deal with data mostly, and refers to platforms, licenses, users, things, which are the files that are placed online on these websites, the categories, and the brands. As far as platforms and users are concerned, as this table shows, we have that the first 7 platforms basically cover 99% of users. This means that the remaining platforms share just the remaining 1%. If we now turn our attention to licenses, we have several types that can be selected by users. What it is clear is that most of the files are not attached to any license. So we have about 68,000 files that are associated with licenses, and this is about 35% of the total number of files. The 2 most common licenses that are used are the Creative Commons with 43% of attributions, and the Commons attribution with 47%. The other types of licenses cover around 1%, or the GNU that covers 2.1%, or attribution non-commercial 3.5%. It's a very low percentage compared to the Creative Commons and the Commons attributions. If we then move to the number of files uploaded, well, the total number of files uploaded that we could find in the span of the years for these 17 platforms is 385,000 files. Each user, on average, uploads 3.7 files. However, this average number is not representative of what really happens, because what really happens in 3D printing, as well as in many other phenomena taking place on the internet, is that there are very few people who upload an incredible number of files. And if we look at the figure representing the 1% of the most active users between 2008 to 2014, we can see that this 1% uploads an incredible number of files, whereas the vast majority of users upload 1 file, probably. So it's up to very few people who are very active and probably strongly believe in 3D printing and the potentials for this tool, who upload most of the files in the platforms. Now, to try and understand what happens in the 3D printing world, we also gathered information on the categories that define each individual file. These are named tags, and we have files with multiple tags. So there are different tags associated with the files. Now, for about 23% of the files, which is roughly 90,000, we have no category at all. In this table, we have the number of files and the cumulative numbers on the right. So that, for example, miniature, we have the 13% of the files have this tag, and for art, we have the 10% of the files have this tag. Another popular tag is jewelry. We have that 9% of the files are labeled as jewelry, and as we go down, we can see that the percentage associated with each name tag decreases, so that games, for example, are only associated to 5% of the files. Finally, to say something about brands, we also looked at the description of the file. Every file has a tag, also a short description. Well, not all of them have descriptions, but some of them have descriptions. We looked into the descriptions to find something that would refer to a brand or a name of the product or something that was recognizable. And we isolated about 40 brand names, of which 27 appeared more than 100 times. And we focused our attention to these 27 appearing more than 100 times. If we look at the table here, we have that iPhone, so a file that is somehow related to the iPhone, covers about 21% of the products. Then we have something related to robot and other things. But what I would like to point out is that the Apple and its products appears extremely often in the description of the files. Now that we have a descriptive picture of 3D printing on these 17 platforms, let's move and look at some inference. First of all, we can look at the number of views, the number of downloads, and price. Now, it appears from the data that views and downloads have a very low impact on the files uploaded. So this means that it seems that there is no clear relation between how many times a file is viewed or downloaded and the user uploading more files. Now, this is related to what I found out in relation to the behavior of individual users. You see on this figure that there are 6 of the top uploaders, so users who upload many files. And on the x-axis you have the time, and on the y-axis you have the number of files. Now, as you can see, there is some sort of reverse U-shaped curve that shows that as time goes by, users upload more files and then start uploading less files. So maybe the 6th user is an exception, but the other 5 seem to follow this type of trend. User number 5, you see there is a kind of spike instead of a curve, uploaded an incredible amount of files, up to 140 files, and then turned down to about 30 over the last period. So this means that there is a behavior that is related to uploads of files that is probably related to time. And this, unfortunately, is a limitation of the study, because we didn't have time of upload available for most of the files that were in the platforms. So what we did, we just use regression analysis on views and downloads and price without taking time into consideration. We can do time, we can use time for just a minority of the data that we have and the users that uploaded files, and so we did, and so we came up with 6 plots, but that certainly deserves further investigation. Some of the files are associated with a price, so that there are platforms that allow people to charge a price for downloading a particular file, and this is consistent with the most active users. So the more people upload files, the more likely is that they put a price on some of the files. And then there are two platforms in particular, SketchUp and Thingiverse, that seem to attract the highest numbers of downloads and views. So in particular, these two platforms seem to be the most popular, or were the most popular up to January 2014. As far as categories and keywords or tags are considered, we have that those files with the tags such as art, mechanic, robot, home, and architecture are also related to a particular price. So price is more likely to appear when a file has one of these elements. And then model is particularly related to the number of downloads. This probably means that up to January 2014, these platforms were probably still for professionals, people who use 3D printing for work, or, and I'm referring to probably engineers mostly, or people who do modeling as a job. That's all for the quick talk. I'll leave the implications and conclusions to Danusha and the others there. Again, apologies for not being able to be there with you. I can still take some questions on the quantitative part. If you have some, you can write me an email at seki@sdu.dk, and well, enjoy the conference, and thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.
Okay, so I'm the oddball in the room. I'm not a lawyer. I don't specialise in IP. I'm an engineer. So what I'm here to do is provide a bit of context around 3D printing, because I imagine many of you are in the room because you've read headlines like 3D printing will be the death of IP and 3D printing, thermonuclear war. They're rather dramatic headlines. My favourite one on here from the UK newspapers is from The Independent, which was that it surely won't be long before we're all rustling up spare parts for broken electronic items. Now that was in 2011. I'm an engineer, I have a 3D printer, I can promise you I have never rustled up a spare part for a broken electronic item. So what we wanted to do was assess the current state of 3D printing and the impact that it could really have on IP. Not speculative, not hype, but facts. So what we did was we considered the IP considerations today, and also the technical feasibility of actually achieving those IP implications. So we split the report, part two of the report, we split it into three sections. Replacement goods, where we looked at things like automotive and domestic appliances. Customised goods, so this whole concept of taking consumer data, scanning, medical, CT data, things like that, and using that to create products. And also what we termed high value, low status goods. What we're talking about here are things that have very low functional value, but very high economic cost. So things like jewellery, figurines, artwork. And although we haven't got time today to look at all the case studies that we covered in the report, if anybody wants to come talk to me about a specific area like scanning or CGI data that we're not going to discuss, please feel free to come and grab me afterwards. So one of the interesting case studies that I really wanted to share with you was around replacement parts. If we look at automotive spare parts, the hypothesis that we came up with was, in the future, you will crash your car, you will go to the garage will print out the part for you on a professional machine, and they'll fit it into your car. And there are many reasons why this is a fantastic idea. You could reduce your inventory, it's perfect, reduced cost. You could reduce the lead time, you get the part into the car quicker. There's less waste, there's no tooling, and you're not tied to a specific brand. BMW can't hold you. You can print out your own parts. However, there are many issues with the technology and many reasons why this isn't going to happen today and it's not going to happen in the next 5 years. Predominantly, the main issues are around things like the digital design is not available. If a part is designed to be 3D printed, you've got the design data. If a part is designed to be injection moulded, you don't, and you have to recreate that data, and that's a big problem. Scanning alone and technologies like CAD can't achieve 3D printable files today, no matter what you get told in the media. The process is actually very slow. It can take up to a week to print a part, and things like the materials aren't suitable, and the technology can't produce parts that you'd actually want to stick in your car. So what we did to actually put some numbers behind this and assess it is we looked at the scale of the market. And the automotive aftermarket is currently worth about 130 billion a year. If you break that down into components, about half of it is made up of tyres, brake pads and batteries. And guess what? You can't print a single one of those. So what we actually found was that 81% of the automotive spare parts aren't suitable for AM manufacture. And the 19% that's remaining, even if they are printable, they're certainly not designed to be printed in the first place. Through our qualitative analysis, we spoke to automotive manufacturers, the major players in this industry, and we asked them if they thought it was realistic that they'd be putting printed parts into cars tomorrow. And the answer is no. It's not on their development schedule today, which means it's not going to be in cars for at least the next 5 years. If we look at domestic appliances, it's a completely different value proposition. We don't have the regulation that you see in the automotive industry. We don't have the risk. If the printed handle that you make for your washing machine falls off, that's okay. The worst you're going to get is a flooded floor. So the hypothesis that we came up with was when your washing machine breaks, can you use a desktop printer? So not a professional machine, but one of the ones that costs 1,500 quid. Can you print out a spare part at home and fit it onto your washing machine? And the answer is, well, yes, people are already doing that today. Thingiverse, the site that was discussed in the last presentation, is if you search for washing machines on there, then you get 56 files that you can download and you can print and you can put onto your washing machine today. And this gets even more interesting because people are now commercialising this. So I'm reliably informed that the height of sophistication for baby transportation is a bugaboo pram, costing in excess of £1,500. And at that serious price tag, they have seriously priced spare parts. So what a guy's done is he's set up his own site where it runs through a company called Shapeways. So you upload your designs to Shapeways, customers see the designs and they can buy them and then Shapeways print them out and ship them to you. So the Bugaboo repair guy, he's got all his CAD files for the parts that he thinks might break on a Bugaboo, and you buy them and then they're shipped directly to you and they cost £5, £10, £15 each. So although domestic appliance spare parts is happening and people are using it, I do have to emphasise it's still not widespread. As discussed in the last presentation, it's a very small minority of users who are actually printing things for use in the home. This is mainly because the technology isn't plug and play. So if you want to print something out, you will have to try again. And just to prove that point, this is a knob from a washing machine that's on Thingiverse. And there's a little story next to it from the guy who says that this is the 6th iteration of this design that he's printed. So that means it took, at a guess, I'd say maybe half an hour to print each one of those iterations. He'd then have to go back, refine the design, print it out again. This is a very, very small minority of people who can be bothered doing this and who would accept a red, holy, rough knob on their washing machine in their kitchen. It's a very small section, but it is growing. So the final one that I wanted to touch upon was what we term high-value, low-status goods. As I mentioned before, we're talking about jewellery, artwork. So the interesting thing about 3D printing is that it changes the value proposition. If you think about a lamp like a Tiffany lamp, for example, a Tiffany lamp, All the value is in the fact that it was made by a craftsman. It wasn't mass produced. It was made using skills that we don't have. What about when there's absolutely no skill involved in the manufacture? What about when the materials you use are basically nylon PA, the same thing that tights are made from? Suddenly, the entire value of a product is in the digital file, it's in the design. And that really changes how we think about the value of a product. So if you look here, this lily lamp is made by Materialise, it's £383. I would suggest that has maybe £20 worth of material in. And not meaning to do any disservice to the technician, it was made with no skill whatsoever. And what we're starting to see in this area where you can just print out something without needing any skill is that we're already getting infringement. So Games Workshop have issued takedown notices to Thingiverse because people were uploading replicas of their little Warhammer models. And an artist called Ashanamias, who trades under the name Dizengoth, ran into trouble when he found that many of the major manufacturers of machines were using his designs to show off their machines and sell product, despite the fact that they were uploaded with a Creative Commons license. So, to conclude, what I really want to leave you with is that the technology has some pretty serious limitations. Until hardware gets better, customers are really going to struggle to replicate products exactly. They can't manufacture the products that look like the products that they want to start off with. Until software gets better, they can't design those products. Software is really difficult to use today, and it's getting better, but it's still not perfect. And things like scanning, even less so. And until materials get better, you certainly won't want to be using those products that you make in any sort of serious situation. However, that's not to say they're not trying, and this is on the horizon. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to set out the conclusions and the recommendations we made to the government, the industry, and so on from the two reports. So the first one, which you can see on the screen, that's the report that involves the data and the quantitative analysis that Davide wrote, and I co-authored with him on the IP side. And then the report that Sophie talked about, which sets out the 6 case studies. And this is our third, which brings it all together. And that's, I'm kind of going to summarize the executive summary. So our conclusions from study 1, which was all to do with the online platforms. Of course, we see that interest and activity is growing every year, and we looked at the years from 2008 to 2014, and we can see a massive growth every single year. And these are some of the main conclusions, I should say. So, for example, as Davide also pointed out, like if you take something like fashion, it attracts the highest number of views and downloads. The areas that are marked at the highest price are areas such as arts and robots. And of course, we see that the people on these online platforms, particularly like Thingiverse, GrabCAD, Shapeways, for example, the files that are mostly shared are those that are related to the leisure and hobby industries, the kind of small items. You don't tend to see very large items on these kind of online platforms. And of course, the number of downloads is unrelated to the price. And again, this could be because of the fact of the lack of accessibility to the right materials. Because of course, if you want to print jewelry, then you need to have that type of material in your home. And also maybe lack of access to sophisticated 3D printers. So quite often it would be those kind of, I said there's printers which go all the way from £200 to very, very high prices. So it could be the lack of access to the sophisticated 3D printers. Davide spoke about the licenses and about the fact that most of the items on these online platforms actually are not licensed. And also when we did this study, particularly study 1, we looked at the terms and conditions, we went through all the licenses. And one of the things about these online platforms is that they try to be kind of user-friendly, but still the users are encouraged to license their work, but there's a lot of legal jargon as well. So our conclusion ultimately was that maybe online platforms should assign the most appropriate license as a default, with opt-out being an option. And this is because 65% of these people who actually upload those files have not licensed their works, and the minority 35% that do license their work make their choice in accordance with the product they are uploading. Also, one of the interesting things about those platforms is the use of these software applications, mobile software applications or apps, and these are used to modify design files. So you might have something like a protected file, maybe Games Workshop, which Sophie referred to, something that is protected by trademark, or it's something that has an IP implication there. And by the use of these type of apps, so these are apps that we saw in a platform called Autodesk, which is one of the platforms with a higher number of users and higher traffic. And you can see, if you look at 123D Catch, it says capture places, people and things in 3D using your iPad or iPhone, share catches or 3D print a real object. If you look at something like Mesh Mixer, on the other side it says Mesh Mixer is the ultimate tool for 3D mashups and remixes, mash, mix, sculpt, stamp, or paint your own 3D designs. So you can modify a file. And of course, if you modify a file that's already protected, it clearly has copyright implications and IP implications. So, of course, the most important question then is, with all these things that are out there, with the kind of, the information that Davide gave and Sophie gave as well, is there a lot of piracy and counterfeiting ongoing right now? Because that was the question to us from the UK IPO on these online platforms. And we concluded there's nothing to indicate that the activity is a mass phenomenon in relation to piracy and counterfeiting yet. So at this moment in time, it is not a mass phenomenon. It is not happening so much that probably we need a regulation right now. Having said that, of course, as Sophie pointed out as well, there are few issues here and there, and one, of course, is the very famous Games Workshop order takedown of their 3D printed Warhammer objects, and one of the more recent ones as well is a Pokemon targets 3D printed design citing copyright infringement. So it's kind of starting out, and of course, as time goes on, these cases would only get more. But at this moment in time, at this current time, it is not a mass phenomenon yet. So in terms of study 2, our conclusion was that over time, of course, industrial manufacturing will reduce in price. It will open up the market for more affordable products. However, the capability of 3D printing technologies, of home 3D printing technologies will remain limited for the foreseeable future. So in terms of, we see those reports that Sophie referred to as well on BBC about, you can print this or you can print that. That type of printing, for all of us to have a 3D printer in our homes and to be able to print the next kind of mug or something for a washing machine, that kind of activity will not become kind of mainstream. We conclude, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. But then that also means, I think that's a positive thing as well, because it also means that we now have time, and we have seen some challenges in the last 10 years with digital technology and what can happen. So that does mean that there's that time period for us to maybe put in place some guidance or, kind of prepare for what is maybe yet to come. Consumer-level 3D scanning is also currently limited, and it will not pose an immediate threat for businesses and IP law. So, and that is quite an interesting thing. So we looked at 3D printing, but we also looked at that in report 2 about in 3D scanning. And this, for example, is a very low-cost 3D scanner that is produced by a company called MakerBot. And this is not very expensive, a few £100. So what can happen if you were to scan the little gnome there? What kind of impact will that have, and how will it scan it? So in the next slide, you can see the scanned item on the top. To you, it will be the top right. And then you can see, using those apps that I mentioned before, how, for example, it's been modified. So, for example, the guy has got a hat. They have multiplied. He's also adopted a beard and got like something else. But anyway, the point is that you can see the exact copy at the top, and you can see the modified items at the bottom. And if I show you the next slide, so I don't know, maybe I'll just go very quickly. If you look at that guy there, and then look at the scan, I don't know that you see it, you would say this exact scan. But here, you see the original item on your left, and then you see the scanned item on your right. Okay, that's because, that is, of course, then you have to color it, etc. But, at the end of the day, even the belt, which I thought at the beginning couldn't be seen very well, you can actually, it has come around, and that's from a very kind of a low-cost scanner. But at the same time, you might also say, it is not an exact copy, and of course, this is not as easy as pressing a button, and that is something that is an important point to make. And also, when you are scanning and printing, it's just not easy as scan up, put the file. It's all okay. You got to clean the data. It's a long process. You got to have the technical ability, and Sophie will probably talk about the challenges that there is. So someone like me who has no knowledge in that, it won't be easy for me. So this is the reason we, talking to industry, we came up with that third conclusion in there. Okay, so very quickly moving on. But at the same time, having said what I said, it is best for business to consider channels through which legal downloads can be made possible. And here again in our research, particularly in study 2, we came across interesting examples. For example, Hasbro, one of the world's biggest companies that manufactures toys, has in fact cooperated with Shapeways to enable 3D printing fan art. And if you look at the bottom there, they talk about how they have opened up their intellectual property to their dedicated fans to legally create 3D, to create tangible 3D printed products. So, and another example is a company called ToyFab. And here what they, you can either, you select a 3D design, you can pay with PayPal, and then you can get if you pay for it, you can get the STL file, which is like, if you Microsoft Word, you say .doc, so this will be like .stl. You can get that file to 3D print in your home, or you can in fact get a code where the file is actually securely streamed to your 3D printer at home. So what I'm saying here is that there are new business models emerging, and it seems that this might be the way to go forward. Whilst of course there will be IP implications, and we may want to think of regulation maybe 5 to 10 years on, etc. Right now in the industry, there are some interesting business models emerging. And these are just a couple that I've highlighted for you. In terms of the automotive industry, we conclude there'll be little commercial impact on either automotive or domestic appliance aftermarket within the next decade as a function of either consumer 3D printing or industrial aim, like again 5 to 10 years. But as the technology continues to grow, we concluded that steps should be taken in relation to traceability of spare parts, particularly in the car spare parts sector. So this is not exactly of course, there's IP implication here as well, but clearly, if we are going to be printing, whatever it is, whether it be spare parts or other products, there has to be that kind of traceability and to find out, from where this has come from and to know exactly the manufacturer. So our key recommendations, first of all, to the government, we recommended that a wait-and-see approach should be adopted. We also felt that maybe if we were to regulate too soon, it might stifle creativity. But at the same time, we recommended that it is probably wise to cultivate a climate, to take steps to cultivate a climate better suited tackling impending IP issues most successfully. Since the report, and also at the time as we're concluding the report as well, and since then, there have been some interesting questions that have, in continuing the work in this area that have come up. And of course, one of those questions is, if, for example, this is the way we should be going, then how can we cultivate a better climate? And also, if you have feedback for us, we'll be very interested to hear your thoughts on it. Also, for the government, we recommend that the UK IPO establish a working group to cover the various IP rights which may need to be tackled, and this could be clarity on the status of design files and how they can be best used in industry, and also in terms of the automotive industry particularly, how to best tackle the traceability of those 3D printed spare parts, as I already mentioned. But how do we envisage a working group? Should it be, for example, are there any other concerns apart from the two, the main areas that we've identified above? And should this working group be led by the UK IPO, or should it be another organization? So again, these are questions that since the report have come up, and we are kind of looking at. And then for the intermediaries, so online platforms, we recommended that online platforms provide more awareness and understanding of the different types of licensing, as I already mentioned before. And of course, the apps that I talked about, those spin-offs and byproducts, whether they should be monitored. Because of course they are growing, and I just gave one snapshot from Autodesk, but there are a lot more. And if so, then how should these be monitored? And then would this be, for example, self-regulation? Finally, for industry, we feel that, as I've already mentioned, and I gave you two examples from, one was from Toy Fab, and the other one Hasbro and Shapeways. But here you can also see other companies, Authentize, Secure 3D, for example. This would be the way forward, different types of business models coming up, and we find that would be the way forward. Manufacturers could also consider licensing design files more widely. They're opening the doors to a range of outlets selling 3D files. And one of the important points here is that we feel in the future, and Sophie referred to this as well, whilst we talk of 3D printing, and I put that quote at the very beginning, we are going to be dealing in those files, and it is the files which are going to be so important. So it is those files that we will want to buy, because once you buy a file for something, it is using that file you can 3D print. We're not going to be, we might all become designers too, but it will be something where we want to pay for something, get the file, and then 3D print. So licensing for manufacturers could be a good option. This will also avoid locking the manufacturer into an agreement through a system such as a one-stop shop. But of course, we ask the question as well, what are the pros and cons of a one-stop shop in practice, and how will this recommendation work? So I think this has already been said by Sophie, so I won't take any further time, but it's just to say that our research concluded ultimately that looking at things like accessibility to materials, printers, etc. for the average user, maybe the impact in our homes may not be felt for the next 5 to 10 years. I shall pass on to Pippa.
Thank you.
So I've been asked to talk about the implications of the 3D printing report and 3D printing on policy. What do I know about 3D printing? Well, apart from the report that the IPO commissioned, not a huge amount, apart from the scare stories that Sophie touched on on kind of things about printing 3D guns and the impact that could have on the economy, and the potential for counterfeit goods, and also the good news stories for potential 3D printed bespoke medication, etc. I have to say, I really struggle to get my head around a 3D printer. I can't really understand how the things I see come out of a 3D printer actually happen, so I think I just need to go and watch the technology happen to get my head around it. So why were we interested at the IPO, and what are we going to do, and why do we commission it? We are very aware of the growth in 3D printing technologies that we've heard about today, and we've had a lot of stakeholders voicing their thoughts on the potential opportunities and the threats brought about by this growing industry. We wanted to know if any of these issues are for the current IP system, and if we should make any changes. So that's why we commissioned the team to do the research and to hopefully give us some answers. So as we've heard earlier, the research focuses on design files, the blueprint for 3D printed objects, and it finds that the copyright status of design files is currently unclear. So as a result, the team recommended clearer guidance on the copyright implications for creating and modifying design files. As David mentioned earlier, the report is available to download from the IPA's research pages, free of charge. So as is all of our commission research, so please do have a look at it. You've got to put in the plug there somewhere, time, right?
Are available.
Yeah. So what does this mean for policy? At some stage, it is likely that 3D printing will have an impact on the licensing of IP rights. And it's fair to say that stakeholders do have quite differing views as to how soon this is likely to become an issue, and that is something that we will have to weigh up. So as the 3D printing industry grows, there will be concerns over IP infringement, protection, and the ability to counterfeit goods. We've obviously already heard from Sophie about the Warhammer figures, and also from medicines to the automotive parts, but we take on the kind of limitations that we've discussed. So clearly, alongside alongside protecting legitimate businesses from having their IP fringed, it's also vital that we protect consumers from substandard and potentially dangerous goods. That's something that the government is obviously very concerned about. So there may need to be interventions in the future to provide guidance or change or bring in new legislation. But we're really keen to understand when there should be intervention. So that was one of the questions we posed to the team. When might the IPO need to actively intervene? One of the most important aspects in considering a government response to any technological change, including 3D printing, is that we don't stifle growth as government. We don't want to stifle growth by implementing changes to legislation or other interventions too soon. And the recommendation which the team gave us was, and we currently agree with, is to take the wait-and-see approach. But we are aware that predictions around the development and take-up of new technologies can often be wrong and can catch us all off guard. So this wait-and-see approach is currently in line with the WIPO position too. But because we want to make sure that we're always on top of this, we've followed the recommendation and the IPO have set up a working group from across the IPA to monitor the progress of the 3D printing industry. We don't want to be suddenly caught out by this. So the group works very closely with colleagues in the Department for Business Innovation and Skills to ensure that information is shared across government widely, and we would welcome any input into that. The report also recommends that the government produces guidance to define whether a CAD file is capable of copyright protection and that the 3D hardware should not be regulated. First of all, I can assure the audience that the government has no intention of regulating 3D hardware. But on the guidance point, we have given it considerable thought, and I thought I had no funky music to go with it. We've given it some thought, but concluded that at this stage, this isn't the right thing for us to be doing. We think the current IP framework can accommodate this, and with an area that's developing so quickly, as we've heard, we think that any guidance that we developed, by the time we developed it and published it, would actually probably be out of date. We've not ruled out bringing in guidance at some point should the situation change, but for now I think we just feel it's best to monitor to see how the market develops before we make any decisions. The other recommendations in the report, as Danusia just touched on, are primarily for industry to consider, and I really welcome any feedback on those. We fully support industry-led solution and a solution that encourages accessibility and understanding for the user and the consumer that doesn't have an impact upon business. So I'd just like to end with a challenge to the audience. As I said earlier, whatever predictions are made are normally wrong. We don't have a crystal ball. And the general consensus from academia and some in the 3D printing world is that we won't see any major impact within the next decade. But we have, as I said earlier, had other stakeholders that suggest that technological advances always take us by surprise and that 3D printing could develop a lot quicker than we expect and have a much greater impact on that disruptive technology. So it's a real fine balancing act. So the challenge to you is, if you think that that is the case, please provide us with the evidence. We're always willing to hear the evidence on both sides, and we really want to make sure that we don't stifle innovation, but we don't want to act too soon, but we don't want to react too late. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing your comments and views.
Thank you.